You mentioned Jamie at the top. Where do we go? Because there's so many different spots. Like, I'm used to doing a Monday show after a Carolina Clemson game, where it's all about what just happened. And we're going to get into that, I'm sure, all week long, right? I mean, you want to celebrate the hell out of this win because it's mammoth for a number of reasons. But I've never done this where, oh, by the way, there's a bigger prize at the end of this that's still sitting there. And like I said, I'm not giving up on this. Kudos to our man, Brad Crawford, because he's like a dog that won't let go of the bone. I mean, he is giving every metric imaginable that would say Carolina deserves in over the teams they're going up against. And I'll just say this, and then I'll yield the floor. It's important that people like Brad Crawford, because Brad, if you look at his bio, I mean, we all know he has ties to South Carolina, but Brad's a national guy, right?
Right.
It does no good if a bunch of just like people in South Carolina media start pumping up South Carolina to be in the playoff. That's just like, okay, great. People in Alabama are doing that. People in Mississippi are doing that. People in Miami are doing that. People in Dallas will do that for SMU if they lose. What you need is some national people to wake the hell up and look at the proper metrics. And if you look at the proper metrics, I am saying this with complete objectivity. Carolina has a very legitimate case to get in over the teams that people are saying should be in. I'll get more into that later, but I'm just telling you right now, this should not be they lost head-to-head, so they're done. No, I don't buy into that. I don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I was on this morning on 107.5 with Bill and Preston and Mike. I mentioned to them, and again, we'll come back to this because we certainly want to make sure that we talk about this football team and this game and the whole 9 yards. But to your point, I said, look, I think a lot of this stuff that's going on with this college football playoff, everybody's got nobody's wrong with the information they're presenting. They're all presenting valid information, and they're looking at it the way that they want to see it. And that's the point of this sport. That has been college football since it began. So I understand it, but it just comes down to one simple question for me: are they one of the best 12 teams in the country or not? You know, and so I think a lot of these conversations keep getting lost. I'm not talking about us specifically here. Right. We all agree. But, I mean, when you look across the country and you look at the folks that they throw out this number and that number and this head-to-head and this, and, well, if this head-to-head matters, then this should matter. Stop. Everybody just stop. Wait a second. Are they one of the best 12 teams in the country or not? That's the question. When you're the committee and you're in a room and you start looking at all of the contenders to fill those last couple of spots, and you ask the question, are they one of the best? Yes. Well, then put them in. Oh, wait, but no. We're not talking about a 7-5 or 6. We're talking about a team that's on a 6-game winning streak. We're talking about a team that's 9-3. All right. Like there's no more. If they're one of the best, then put them in. Period. The end. Not is the resume, well, we can't because of the head-to-head. No. Are they one of the best? And that's where it should stop, in my opinion.
I wouldn't argue with you. I would just add to that. There are things in their resume that would also say that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned this, I guess it was last week on Wednesday's show. If we had a metric the way they do in college basketball, which is not an easy thing to do to select the 34 best at-large teams. Quite frankly, you can argue it's a much more difficult job than picking 7 in college football. But we are turning this into brain surgery somehow. But if you had a metric like that, that considered all the meaningful numbers, I'm convinced Carolina would be in.
Yeah.
If we had a net ranking in college football, I'm convinced Carolina would be in, and I'm not even sure it would be that close. But we don't. So to your point, Jamie, it's not just about, well, okay, who's one of the top 12 teams right now playing college football. Unfortunately, they're going to say, well, we got to back that up with a resume, and we got to back that up with metrics. And I would tell you, I think they're looking at some of the right metrics, and they're leaving out some of the most important metrics, such as bad losses and road wins. And I don't know how you just ignore that when you come up with your data.
Yeah, they haven't even mentioned that one time. Maybe they do at the end, but I've not heard I mean, Ward Manuel, I give him the hard time, obviously, because he's not very coherent with what he says, but he's just the guy they shove out there to talk. I mean, this was the concern of mine was that because the 14 playoff committee was always very old school with how they made decisions. You can tell that by the seeding. If you're undefeated and from a power conference team, or you have one loss, like Clemson was a couple in 2017 when they lost to Alabama as a 4 seed. Clemson got number one because they were number one because they lost, early to Syracuse and were 11-1, won the ACC. And you can tell that by the seeding. The seeding doesn't matter in a 14 playoff, I don't think. Sometimes maybe you get a matchup. You would, Alabama obviously would have probably rather played Washington or even Texas last year in the semis, but they were very old school with their thinking, and I've seen nothing so far now that it's gone to 12 to make me think otherwise, other than historically with the 4 team, they would make their biggest moves at the end. Like they would dangle it and dangle it and dangle it, and then boom, at the end, it always made sense. But that's a lot easier. I thought the whole reason to go to 12 was to account for teams like South Carolina that lost early, but then got their act together and were clearly one of the best teams in the country late. And I guarantee you, if it wasn't South Carolina, if it was Alabama that had lost early but then won 6 straight, there would be no question. They would be in over SMU, assuming SMU loses. Miami, I think Miami screwed itself Saturday because you kind of look at the Vegas odds for them to get in now, and they're behind Carolina. They're like plus 1,000. Carolina's plus 470. Not saying Vegas is always right, but there's no planet where a team like Miami, and it's not even just their losses. Georgia Tech and Syracuse are respectable football teams. They're not world beaters, but they're respectable football teams. It's the fact they don't play any defense at all. Right. I mean, that defense, how can you say this team deserves to play for a championship when they're so grossly awful on one side of the ball? Mm-hmm. That makes no sense to me. And I know the media loves offense and they love Cam Ward. And by God, we all love Cam Ward. But you can't put a team in a bad conference that screws around and loses games or that gives up a ton of yards and points just because of one player, in my opinion. So that's it there. SMU, Miami, and Clemson have not beaten a ranked team, this year. I guess the first one will be in the ACC championship game coming up. That's a 1-bid league if I've ever seen one. Mm-hmm. Same with the Big 12. The Big 10, Carolina's probably going to get screwed by the Big 10 because they're not going to put Ohio State out. They should. No. They should be out. For losing that game to Michigan, they should be out, but they won't be. So we'll see.
Well, look, we got John Whittle coming up, so we'll slide to a quick break and we'll get him in and make him part of this conversation too. But yeah, there's a Mike, as you said, there's 100 different ways to have this conversation, and we'll probably have it at least 100 different ways, if not more than that, throughout the week. But we certainly don't want to take away from the fact that Carolina did it again.